So I want you to think about this for a second. A field is mature of spinach or lettuce. You go and harvest it. It goes to a plant. It gets washed and packaged, stuck in a bag, goes to the store. So it's been a couple of days by the time it gets harvested, cooled, washed, bagged, sent to the store. We're now a few days into this. If it's a store back east, it might be even longer. So it went to Wisconsin. We might be talking a week later. And somebody buys it and they take it home. Maybe they eat it that night. Maybe they eat it a few days later. Now, the farmer doesn't sit still. They disc that field. It was already harvested. It gets disked and it's starting to get prepped for the next planting. So the field's gone. And so now people start eating that product. And over the course of the next week, most of that product gets eaten. A day or 2 or 3 later, people start getting sick. And at first you're like, I've got a stomach ache. I don't feel good. I'm sick. So it takes a 2, 3, 4 days of being sick for a lot of people to really go to the doctor. So now we're at a couple weeks at least. And people are starting to show up at the doctor. And the first thing the doctor says, when you don't know whether you should throw up or have diarrhea, and he's going to ask you, what did you eat over the last 2 weeks or week? I have a hard time remembering what I had for breakfast today. And so they have to put all this information together. The field is gone. And it's just really difficult to figure out how to trace this back. It's hard. And the field's gone, so you don't have anything to measure in the field. You can take soil samples, but that might not give you anything. So trying to trace things back is really hard. So let me get back to the slides. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration of the United States, defines adulterated. So it considers adulterated any ready-to-eat crops produced under unsanitary conditions. Produced under unsanitary conditions. And so what actually happened? What was unsanitary? It could be sewage exposure because of a septic tank nearby or some sort of a flooding event that caused a problem during heavy rains, animal wastes, contaminated water sources. There are lots of things that can create these unsanitary conditions, even when you think you're doing your best. So you need to know what's going on. Where are septic tanks? You can't grow near them. If there's a flood, you can't harvest that product if it's been in contact with flood water, and all kinds of things to avoid adulteration or unsanitary conditions. And a lot of produce for generations has been grown right next door to where you have animals. You have chickens and cows and sheep and hogs and all kinds of farm animals. And where you don't have the farm animals right next door, you start the production fields. And that can be a big problem because the coliform bacteria from the guts of these animals can get on the produce. Now, if it's just some typical coliform, again, you can't figure out what's going on. It doesn't kill anybody, but somebody gets sick, maybe throws up, and it's no big deal. Now we have this E. coli 0157H7 that is well established in a lot of our wildlife and our domesticated animals, and that is a new big problem. In light of continuing outbreaks associated with fresh and fresh cut lettuce and other leafy greens, particularly from California, we are issuing this second letter to reiterate our concerns and to strongly encourage firms in your industry to review their current operations. Basically, the FDA said, hello, California, get your stuff together. We already sent you a letter and you ignored it. maybe flipped us off in the process. And a lot of people, once again, looked at this new second warning from the FDA and said, screw them. I'm not going to do it. They don't know what they're talking about. Fortunately, there were people on the Leafy Greens Research Board in the local area, the Grower Shipper Association of Salinas, and some of the major growers that got together and said, no, 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 no. We can't just thumb our nose at them and assume that they don't know what they're doing, because these outbreaks are happening. They are real. And regardless of whether it's only the small growers that are causing a problem, our entire industry is taking the brunt of this, because most of these outbreaks that were traced back to an actual piece of ground, most likely, did come from small growers, small operators. The bigger ones were doing a better job. They had better water sources, they had cleaner facilities, but still, you can't just say, go away, excuse me, not USDA, the FDA. You can't tell them to go away, because what eventually would have happened is they would have come back at us with a law saying, you won't play nice, we're going to force this upon you. And so the smart growers and business folks in this area basically said, let's get together. The logical collection of minds was in this Leafy Greens Research Board. And so that was the foundation of it, along with collaboration with the the Grower Shipper Association, GSA. And they said, what are we going to do? And they created a voluntary set of gaps, good agricultural practices, that were designed based on the 1998 FDA document about microbial safety. And fortunately they did, because it slowed down the federal government from running too fast trying to create a new federal law. Nobody knew what was going to happen at that time, but everybody suspected that at some point the federal government's going to come around with something. And by having a voluntary program and having the vast majority of large purchasers, shippers, and handlers signing on saying, we will only handle LGMA volunteers, people who signed the Leafy Greens marketing agreement, it created a much better environment for our industry. So we did respond with the LGMA. And then eventually the Food Safety Modernization Act was created in 2010, and it was signed into law in 2010, became official in 2011. So a reassessment of current manure composting regulations in light of recent scientific findings, an assessment of septic tank systems that may leak or flow into agricultural ditches or creeks. All of these things are serious potential problems. An assessment of farm worker access to portable toilets and hand washing facilities. A lot of these things were in place where a lot of growers, especially the bigger ones, were doing a really good job already. They could refine their operations to a certain extent, but it wasn't enough. There were a lot of small to mid-sized growers that just weren't doing as good of a job, and not everybody was sure what to look at. An assessment of the locations of fields known to flood frequently. If it's a high flood area, that's a high risk area. An assessment of the need for mandatory gaps or HACCP plans. We'll talk about HACCP later. That's the Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. This was initially developed by NASA to have extremely high food safety standards for astronauts. And so it's a way of creating a food safety procedures for your specific company. And so you take the GAPS as general guidelines and you turn that into a HACCP plan for your company. 2006, Wendy's E. coli outbreak. Again, E. coli 021H19. So this one is not the 0157H7, sorry. But it is another one of the lesser known bad guys. It causes HUS, likely lettuce from California. Is that true? Not sure about this one. 2006. This was the proverbial explosion. This was the one that most people talk about when they say the food safety outbreak, the spinach outbreak, the E. coli in spinach. When people talk about those things, like, of course, you know, it is this one, the 2006 Dole E. coli outbreak. 204 persons infected. So unlike the 2005 Dole one, this is much bigger. It is also the 0157H7, and it's in 26 states. 102, half of them hospitalized. 31 with the HUS. Now, you can recover from HUS, but it might give you long-term damage. 5 people died. This changed everything. This was really the biggest turning point in terms of food safety. So the 0157H7 was isolated from 13 packages of Dole-owned spinach. It was actually one of their smaller companies. DNA fingerprints of all 13 matched the outbreak strain of the ill people, so it was pretty damn obvious. And yes, my cat is wanting attention right now. The same strain found on one of 4 farms that supplied the spinach to a single manufacturing facility on a particular day. There were cow pies noticed for cow production, the water source and wild pig gut. All of that had this DNA fingerprint. So it was in the environment. How did it get in the bag of lettuce? I don't know that they ever figured out exactly. But it was in the environment. It was in the wild pigs. It was in the cows. It was in the water. It was in the environment. Taco E. coli outbreaks. 150 sickened. Again, lettuce grown in California. Civil litigation. How does it work? Let's take a quick break. I'll be right back.